My husband canceled our 10th anniversary dinner, claiming he had an emergency client presentation. Through the rain-streaked windshield of my car, I watched him walk up the steps of another woman's brownstone, carrying an expensive bottle of champagne and a bouquet of peonies, my favorite flowers. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. He thought I would be waiting at home, scrolling through our wedding album, wondering why our marriage had grown so distant. Instead, I followed him to her doorstep with signed divorce papers in hand and evidence of a 3-year affair exposed. The look that crossed both their faces when the door opened is something I'll never forget. But let me explain how 10 years of marriage ended on the night it was supposed to be celebrated. The digital clock on my dashboard read 8:17 p.m., exactly 47 minutes after our anniversary dinner reservation that David had canceled. 4 hours. After the text saying an emergency client presentation would keep him at the office until midnight. 17 minutes since I'd watched my husband of 10 years walk up to another woman's brownstone with peonies and champagne that should have been mine. The weight of the leather portfolio in my hands felt heavier than the decade we'd spent building a life together. Inside were divorce papers I'd had drawn up 3 weeks ago when I first discovered the truth about David's late nights at the office. I hadn't planned on delivering them tonight, but then again, David hadn't planned on me following him either. They say defining moments in life appear when you least expect them. Mine arrived on our 10th anniversary, sitting in my parked car in a neighborhood across town, watching raindrops trace paths down my windshield like the tears I refused to shed. Had rehearsed this moment for 21 days straight. Practiced what I would say when I finally confronted David about his affair. Imagined the shock, the denial, the inevitable confession. But sitting there, rain drumming on the roof of my car, I realized no amount of preparation could steady my racing heart. I had spent 3 hours getting ready for a dinner that would never happen, chosen a black dress that David once said made me look like a classic movie star, applied makeup with the precision of someone who still believed in perfect evenings and honest promises. Now I sat outside another woman's home, witnessing the death of those beliefs in real time. I've always wondered what true shock looks like on a person's face. That split second when the mind can't process what the eyes are seeing. When I pressed that doorbell tonight, I found out. I never thought I'd become this woman. The one following her husband, gathering evidence, consulting lawyers. The one sitting in a parked car about to shatter the comfortable life we'd both been living. This wasn't the future I had imagined. At 38, I had checked all the boxes life had offered. Senior editor at a prestigious publishing house by 32, dream condo in the city by 35, marriage to my college sweetheart that all our friends admired. I helped other people tell their stories while methodically constructing my own. Our home was a showcase of carefully selected art and furniture, each piece telling the story of our travels, our tastes, our supposed connection. As I sat in my car staring at her front door, I thought about all the stories we tell ourselves to avoid facing painful truths, how David was just working hard for our future, how his emotional distance was stress, not disinterest, how the late nights and weekend emergencies were dedication to his career, not to someone else. For months, I had been the woman waiting at home, the one making excuses to friends about his absences, the one lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering where he really was. Tonight, I was done waiting. I straightened my posture, tucked the portfolio under my arm, and stepped out into the rain. My heels clicked against the wet pavement as I approached the brownstone, each step more determined than the last. I climbed the stairs to her front door, rain soaking through my carefully chosen anniversary dress, and pressed the doorbell without hesitation. I listened to its cheerful chime echo through the house. Inside, I could hear movement, laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sounds of an anniversary celebration that wasn't mine. My fingers tightened around the leather portfolio, its contents representing the end of a decade-long chapter of my life. The door swung open, and there was David, still in his work suit, but with his tie loosened, top button undone, the way he used to look coming home to me after a long day. His expression transformed from warm anticipation to cold fear in the span of a heartbeat. "Natalie? What? How did you—" I remained composed, extending the portfolio toward him. "Happy anniversary, David." A woman appeared behind him, confusion on her face. She was beautiful, younger, with the effortless glamour of someone who probably didn't need to schedule her haircut 6 weeks in advance. She looked at me with puzzlement, then at David with growing understanding. "David, who is this?" she asked, her hand coming to rest possessively on his arm. "I'm his wife," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite everything. Or at least, I am for the moment. I held out the portfolio, my hand unwavering. "I thought I'd save you a trip to the lawyer's office. Everything's there, signed, notarized, ready for your signature." David stared at the portfolio but didn't take it. "Natalie, please, this isn't— I can explain." "There's nothing to explain." "Not anymore," I said with calm dignity. I placed the portfolio in his hands, then turned to the woman. "He likes his coffee with 2 sugars no matter what he tells you about cutting back. He can't sleep without a white noise machine, and he'll insist he doesn't snore. But trust me, he does." I paused, meeting her eyes directly. "And he apparently makes the same promises to multiple women, so I'd consider that carefully." I turned back to David, who stood speechless, portfolio clutched in his trembling hands. 10 years, David. 10 years of building a life while you were building lies. I deserve better. We both know that. Rain continued to fall as I turned to leave, holding my posture straight, dignified even in betrayal. As I walked back to my car, I felt the weight of those 10 years lifting with each step, the rain washing away the woman who made excuses, who waited up, who believed the lies. I didn't look back, not at the brownstone, not at David, not at the life I was leaving behind. They say the truth will set you free. What they don't tell you is that freedom comes with its own kind of pain and power. I had never felt more of both than I did in that moment, driving away from the man who had broken my heart and the woman who had unwittingly helped me find my strength. 10 years earlier, I stood beneath an arch of twisting vines and white roses, my hands trembling as I held David's. The October sunlight filtered through the vineyard surrounding us, creating patterns of gold and shadow across his face. His eyes, those warm brown eyes that had captivated me since our first meeting in Professor Mitchell's Literature of the American South seminar, were filled with unshed tears. "I promise to be your partner, your confidant, your greatest champion," David said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I will love you through success and failure, through joy and sorrow, through all the chapters we write together. This I vow to you today and always." I believed every word. Why wouldn't I? We had been the golden couple of our graduate program, David with his brilliant critical analyses and me with my talent for discovering overlooked voices and untold stories. Our professors had joked that between us, we would revolutionize American publishing. We had dreams of starting our own literary journal someday, of championing voices that changed how people thought about fiction and truth. Our courtship had been a story as carefully crafted as any novel. Coffee dates between classes turned into late nights discussing Faulkner and Welty, his shoulder brushing mine as we leaned over shared books. Our first kiss happened surrounded by stacks of literary journals and manuscript pages when he stayed up all night helping me finish my thesis after my computer crashed. By graduation, our classmates treated us as a single entity, David and Natalie, the inseparable pair whose discussions about character development and narrative structure could last until dawn. "You two just make sense together," my best friend Eliza told me at our engagement party. "Like characters written by the same author." That's how it felt. like we were two protagonists in the same story, our character arcs perfectly aligned. David was bold where I was cautious. I was detail-oriented where he sometimes missed the finer points. We completed each other in ways that seemed predestined. Our first apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom walk-up with windows that stuck in summer and radiators that clanged all winter. But it was ours. We spent weekends scouring used bookstores for first editions, painting walls at midnight, arguing playfully about whether Hemingway or Fitzgerald had a more lasting impact. The bathroom door never quite closed right, and the kitchen barely fit both of us at once, but we loved it. We made plans there, sprawled on our second-hand couch, legs intertwined, sketching our future on the backs of publishers' rejection letters. Someday, David would say, tracing imaginary bookshelves in the air above us, "We'll have a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves and one of those rolling ladders. And a reading nook with a bay window," I'd add to his vision. "And first editions of all. Our favorites," he'd continue. "And copies of all the books we've edited or published," I'd finish. We built that dream library in our minds 100 different ways before we ever had the space for it in reality. The early years of our marriage were golden. We worked for different publishing houses but collaborated on side projects and literary events. David's star rose quickly. His editorial instincts caught the attention of senior partners. I specialized in finding and developing new voices, particularly women writers and writers of color, bringing fresh perspectives to an industry that needed them. We pushed each other, challenged each other, celebrated each other's victories as our own. For our first anniversary, David surprised me with a trip to New Orleans to visit Faulkner's house and the sites that had inspired so many of the works we loved. We wandered through the Garden District hand in hand, marveling at the historic homes and lush gardens. In a small bookshop in the French Quarter, David pulled me close. "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off." "This is what I want our work to do," he whispered. "I want the books we bring into the world to make people feel something, to change how they see themselves and others. To tell stories that haven't been told," I answered, leaning into him. "The stories that need to be told," he agreed, kissing me right there between shelves of Southern Gothic classics. I felt like we were standing at the center of possibility. For our second anniversary, I surprised him with news that I'd been approached to lead a new imprint focused on emerging voices, the youngest editor to receive such an opportunity at my publishing house. We celebrated with champagne on our apartment's tiny balcony, making plans for the future with the city lights spread out below us. "We're going to make it, Nat," he said, using the nickname only he ever used. "Everything we've talked about, it's all happening." By our third anniversary, David had also been promoted to senior editor at his firm. We bought a spacious condo in a converted warehouse downtown and began designing our dream library in earnest. Nights and weekends were spent debating the merits of built-in versus freestanding shelves, arguing playfully about whether the reading chairs should face the windows for natural light or the interior for coziness. "Both," David finally declared. "One night. 2 chairs, one facing each way, yours and mine." "Extravagant," I teased. "Only the best for us," he replied, kissing the top of my head. "We've earned this." And we had. We both worked 60-hour weeks, took on freelance editing projects, and saved aggressively. We had a plan: establish our reputations, build our dream home, then start our own literary journal by the time we turned 40. Children were a question mark, something we said we'd discuss once our careers were more established. Our fourth anniversary was spent in our newly renovated condo, having a picnic on the floor of our nearly completed library. David brought champagne and strawberries, and we toasted to our future as the sun set through the floor-to-ceiling windows he had insisted on installing. "To tell stories that matter," he said, his glass clinking against mine. "To us," I replied, believing with my whole heart that us was unshakable. By our 5th anniversary, the condo was complete, an urban dream of exposed brick, warm wood, and walls of books. It was featured in a local design magazine, described as a literary haven that reflects its scholarly inhabitants. We hosted a housewarming party that doubled as an anniversary celebration, surrounded by friends and colleagues who marveled at what we had accomplished. "You two are living the dream," they said. "You make it look so easy." And in many ways, it was easy. We were partners in everything. We finished each other's sentences, anticipated each other's needs, moved through our spaces and our lives in perfect choreography. When David was asked to lead a new literary fiction division at his publishing house, I rearranged my schedule to help him prepare his vision statement. When I struggled with a difficult author, he stayed up late brainstorming solutions with me. We were David and Natalie, a perfect unit, a success story. At least, that's what I thought. Sitting in my car outside the brownstone, engine still running, windshield wipers keeping rhythm with my heartbeat, I found myself in a suspended moment between two lives. The one I had lived with for 10 years, Mrs. Natalie Reynolds, devoted wife and rising star editor, and whatever unknown identity awaited me after tonight. The rain came down harder now, blurring the edges of her tasteful Beacon Hill residence. Street lamps cast golden pools on the wet pavement, and from where I was parked, I could see warm light spilling from her first-floor windows. Behind those windows, my husband was pouring champagne, placing peonies in a vase, whispering promises that once belonged exclusively to me. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My carefully applied makeup remained intact, though my eyes held a hardness I barely recognized. My dark hair, styled in loose waves for a dinner that would never happen, now framed a face set with determination. The woman looking back at me wasn't broken. She was resolute. The clock on my dashboard now read 8:22 p.m. 5 minutes had passed since I'd parked across from her brownstone. 5 minutes of watching raindrops race down my windshield while I gathered the courage to end a decade-long marriage. To most people, 5 minutes is nothing, barely enough time to brew coffee or skim a news article. But in those 5 minutes, I lived a lifetime of realizations. I realized I wasn't trembling anymore. My hands rested steady on the steering wheel, my breathing measured and calm. The panic attacks that had plagued me for weeks after discovering David's betrayal were noticeably absent. In their place was something unfamiliar yet welcome: clarity. The leather portfolio on the passenger seat contained more than just divorce papers. It held evidence of a 3-year affair meticulously documented by the private investigator I'd hired 6 weeks ago. Hotel receipts, credit card statements, photographs, and text message transcripts. A paper trail of betrayal that led directly to Catherine Winters, Associate Professor of Comparative Literature at Boston University. I ran my fingers over the embossed leather of the portfolio, feeling the weight of its contents. Inside was enough evidence to ensure I wouldn't be questioned if this went to court, enough proof to silence any denials David might attempt. But the portfolio represented something beyond legal leverage. It was the physical manifestation of my reclaimed agency. 3 weeks ago, when the private investigator had first handed me this portfolio, I'd been unable to open it for 2 days. It sat on my home office desk like a bomb waiting to detonate. When I finally gathered the courage to examine its contents, I did so with a glass of wine in hand, expecting to crumble under the weight of confirmation. Instead, each document I reviewed, each photograph I studied, seemed to cauterize something within me, burning away uncertainty and sealing off pain. Now, that same portfolio felt like a shield in my hands, or perhaps a sword. The rain drummed, harder against the roof of my car as I made my decision. I could drive away now, return to our condo, pack my things while David was still with Catherine, leave the divorce papers on his desk, and disappear before he returned. It would be cleaner, less confrontational. I could avoid the scene, the inevitable denials, the desperate explanations. But that ending wouldn't be mine. It would be an epilogue written by default, not choice. After years of editing other people's Stories. I knew the importance of a powerful conclusion. This chapter of my life deserved a definitive ending, not for David's sake, but for my own. I switched off the engine, grabbed the portfolio and my purse, and opened the car door. The rain immediately soaked through my dress, a black Diane Vaughn Furstenberg wrap that had cost more than I'd normally spend, chosen specifically for our anniversary dinner at Sorolina, where David had proposed exactly 11 years ago. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, beginning and ending in the same place, on the same date, a perfect narrative circle. My heels clicked against the wet pavement as I crossed the street, each step deliberate. I approached Catherine's brownstone, taking in its tasteful restoration and brass fixtures. Of course, David would fall for someone who lived in a historically significant property with original architectural details. Catherine's academic credentials and literary background made her the perfect intellectual match for him, like a more convenient, unencumbered version of me. As I climbed the stairs to her front door, I felt an odd sense of déjà vu, as though I'd rehearsed this moment so many times in my mind that reality now seemed like just another simulation. The weight of the portfolio in my hands, the feel of rain against my skin, the sound of laughter filtering through from inside. All of it felt simultaneously real and surreal. I raised my hand to the doorbell, hesitating for just a moment. Flash of memories cycled through my mind, David's face on our wedding day, his voice reading manuscript pages aloud in our first apartment, his hand finding mine across restaurant tables, cinema seats, bookstore aisles. 10 years of shared history compressed into a single breath. I pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed inside, followed by silence. The laughter stopped. Low voices murmured in what sounded like confused consultation. Footsteps approached, and I straightened my spine, squared my shoulders. I was acutely aware of how I must look, soaking wet, standing alone on a doorstep where I had no reason to be, clutching a leather portfolio like it contained state secrets. The door opened, and there was David, his expression transforming from warm anticipation to shock in the span of a heartbeat. In the background, I could see a dining table set for two, candlelight flickering, an open bottle of champagne, the anniversary celebration I should have been having. I didn't give him time to recover. "Happy anniversary, David." The confusion on his face shifted to panic as he realized the full scope of what was happening. Behind him, Catherine appeared, her hand coming to rest possessively on his arm. "David, who is this?" she asked, and I could tell from her tone that she genuinely didn't know. This wasn't the reaction of a woman who knew she was seeing a married man. It was the confused response of someone who believed she was in an exclusive relationship. "I'm his wife," I said, keeping my voice level. Or at least, I am for the moment. The ball shock that registered on Catherine's face was almost worth the pain of the last 6 weeks. Almost. Her hand dropped from David's arm as though it had suddenly become electrified. She stepped back, eyes darting between us in growing comprehension. "Wife?" she repeated, her voice barely audible over the rain. "You're married?" David looked like he might be sick. "Catherine, I can explain." "I'm not here for explanations," I interrupted, holding out the portfolio. "I've heard enough of those already. I'm here to deliver these." David stared at the portfolio but made no move to take it. "Natalie, please let's talk about this privately. This isn't what? The appropriate time? The right venue?" I let out a small, humorless laugh. "I think those considerations went out the window when you decided to spend our anniversary with her instead of me." Catherine had backed further into the hallway, arms wrapped around herself protectively. 3 years, she said suddenly, her voice thick with emotion. "We've been together for 3 years. You told me you were divorced." I nodded, feeling an unexpected moment of solidarity with this woman. 3 years. That tracks with my evidence. Right about when he got that big promotion and started working late 3 nights a week. David's face contorted in anger, his shock giving way to defensiveness. You had me investigated? What kind of person does that? The kind whose husband is cheating on her, I replied evenly. The kind who deserves the truth. I placed the portfolio firmly in his hands. Everything's there, signed, notarized, ready for your signature. I've waived alimony, though my lawyer advised against it. The condo will be sold and proceeds split equally. You can keep your precious first editions. I've already moved my personal belongings out. David clutched the portfolio, his knuckles white. You've moved out? When? Where? Today. While you were preparing for your evening with Professor Winters. Here. I turned to Catherine, who looked shell-shocked. He likes his coffee with 2 sugars, no matter what he tells you about cutting back. He can't sleep without a white noise machine, and he'll insist he doesn't snore, but trust me, he does. Catherine didn't respond, her gaze now fixed on David with undisguised horror. 10 years, David, I continued, turning back to my husband. 10 years of building a life together while you were building lies. I deserved better than that. I think Professor Winters did too. I stepped back, preparing to leave. The rain had soaked through my dress completely now, but I hardly felt it. The chill I'd carried inside for weeks had finally broken. Natalie, wait, David called after me as I turned to go. You can't just... This isn't fair. You can't judge. 10 years of marriage on one mistake. I paused on the top step, turning back to face him one last time. One mistake is forgetting an anniversary, David. What you did was make thousands of deliberate choices, day after day, for 3 years. You chose to start a relationship with Catherine. You chose to lie to both of us. You chose to come here. Tonight, instead of meeting me at Sorellina, I gestured to the portfolio in his hands. And now I'm choosing to end our marriage with the same deliberation you used to betray it. Sign the papers. My lawyer will contact yours. With that, I descended the steps, feeling lighter with each one. Behind me, I could hear Catherine's voice, rising in anger, demanding explanations David couldn't possibly provide. Their story was no longer mine to edit. I walked back to my car through the rain, not rushing despite being soaked. Each step took me further from the life I had known and closer to whatever awaited me. I didn't look back at the brownstone, at the warm light spilling from its windows, at the man who had once been the center of my world. As I slid behind the wheel, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror again. My makeup had finally succumbed to the rain, mascara tracing faint shadows beneath my eyes. But those eyes, they held something I hadn't seen in them for a long time. Relief, resolve, perhaps even the first glimmer of freedom. I started the engine, turned on the heat to counter the chill of my wet clothes, and pulled away from the curb. As Catherine's brownstone receded in my rearview mirror, I felt the strangest urge to laugh. Not from happiness exactly, but from the sudden, startling recognition of my own strength. 10 years ago, I had stood before friends and family and promised to love David Reynolds in sickness and in health, for better or worse, till death did us part. I had meant every word. What I hadn't understood then was that sometimes keeping your own heart beating required letting another person go. I drove through rain-slicked streets, past restaurants filled with couples celebrating ordinary Tuesday evenings, past bookstores where David and I had once spent hours, past the office building where I'd first realized something was wrong when I'd surprised him with lunch and found him gone on a day he'd claimed to be swamped with meetings. The city looked different somehow, sharper, more vivid, as though I was seeing it through new eyes. Perhaps I was. The eyes of Natalie Chen, no longer Reynolds. Editor, reader, woman reclaiming her story. At a red light, I reached for my phone and pulled up Eliza's contact. My finger hovered over the call button. Eliza had been warning me about David for months, noticing his absences, his distraction, the way his stories didn't quite add up. I had defended him, made excuses, chosen to believe the fiction rather than face the truth. I owed her an apology, and perhaps a thank you, but not tonight. Tonight belonged to me alone. This moment of transition, this crossing from one life to another. Instead, I put the phone down and turned up the radio. Aretha Franklin's powerful voice filled the car, demanding respect. I found myself smiling as I drove toward the small furnished apartment I'd rented 3 weeks ago in preparation for this moment, a temporary haven while I figured out what came next. The rain was easing now, the worst of the storm passing. Through breaks in the clouds, stars were becoming visible, pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. I rolled down my window, letting the cool, rain-washed air fill my lungs. For the first time in months, I could breathe deeply without the weight of suspicion pressing against my chest. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the need to check David's location on my phone or wonder who he was really with. For the first time in years, perhaps, I was fully present in my own life rather than orbiting his. The decision had been made. The confrontation was over. Whatever came next, the legal proceedings, the division of assets, the explanations to friends and family, all of that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight was about crossing a threshold I couldn't uncross, about closing a door firmly behind me as I drove toward my new temporary home. I thought about the library David and I had so carefully built together. The first editions we'd collected, the signed copies from authors we'd edited, the matching reading chairs positioned just so. All those stories bound in leather and cloth, arranged on custom shelves, and none of them had prepared me for writing my own ending. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my career helping others shape narratives, find their voices, tell their truths, all while accepting a fiction in my personal life. No more. Whatever story I wrote next would be honest, would be mine. I pulled into the parking garage beneath my new apartment building, found my designated spot, and cut the engine. For a moment I sat in silence, letting the reality of what I'd just done settle over me. I had confronted my husband and his mistress. I had ended my marriage on my own terms. I had chosen myself. The realization didn't bring euphoria or even relief, not exactly. What it brought was a profound sense of alignment, of rightness. As though after years of living slightly off-center, something fundamental had clicked into place. I gathered my purse and stepped out of the car, leaving the empty portfolio behind. Its purpose had been served. The evidence, the papers, all of it was now in David's hands. The weight I carried now was only my own, and for the first time in a long time it felt manageable. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Tomorrow I will begin the process of untangling 10 years of shared life. Tomorrow I will face the reactions of friends, colleagues, and family. Tomorrow I would need to be strong in different ways. But tonight I had already been stronger than I ever thought possible. And that was enough. 28 years before I stood on Catherine Winter's doorstep in the rain, I sat cross-legged on my childhood bedroom floor in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, surrounded by books. My mother found me there, completely absorbed in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, oblivious to the fact that dinner had been called twice. "Natalie Chen," she said, hands on her hips but a smile playing at her lips. "The world could end and you'd still be turning pages." I looked up, momentarily disoriented as I surfaced from Austen's world. "Sorry, Mom. I just needed to know if Elizabeth would figure out Darcy wasn't really the villain." Mom sat on the edge of my bed, glancing at the stacks of books surrounding me like a fortress. "You know, most 12-year-olds aren't reading classic literature for fun. Most 12-year-olds don't have Mrs. Abernathy for a librarian," I replied, carefully marking my place and standing up. Mrs. Abernathy, the school librarian, had taken a special interest in me after finding me hiding in the biography section during lunch period. Instead of sending me back to the cafeteria, she'd handed me Anne of Green Gables, and found me a quiet corner where I could read in peace. This early memory resurfaced as I unpacked my first box of books in the small furnished apartment I'd rented 3 weeks earlier, my temporary sanctuary after leaving the condo I had shared with David. The apartment was nothing special, a one-bedroom in a modern building with generic furnishings and beige walls. But it was mine alone, and that made all the difference. I placed my worn copy of Pride and Prejudice on the single bookshelf, smiling at the synchronicity. Once again, I found myself rebuilding after discovering a man wasn't who I thought he was. Elizabeth Bennet would approve. Growing up in Cedar Rapids as the only child of Michael Chen, a structural engineer, and Sophia Chen, a high school English teacher, I inherited my father's methodical approach to problem-solving and my mother's love of literature. Our modest 3-bedroom house had bookshelves in every room, and dinner table conversations often revolved around whatever my mother was teaching or I was reading. My father, pragmatic to his core, would listen to our literary discussions with fond amusement before inevitably asking, "But what's the practical application?" This question became a family joke, but it also taught me to find balance between imagination and reality, a skill that would serve me well as an editor. I was never the most popular girl in school, but I wasn't an outcast either. I existed comfortably, in the middle, editor of the school newspaper, member of the debate team, the girl who always had book recommendations and helped classmates with their essays. My close circle of friends shared my interests in literature and writing, and we spent weekends discussing books at the local coffee shop or attending poetry readings at the community college. My parents had expected me to follow in their footsteps, engineering or teaching, but during my junior year of high school, I interned at a small local publishing company that produced regional cookbooks and travel guides. The experience changed everything. Watching manuscripts transform into finished books felt like witnessing magic, and I knew I had found my calling. Publishing combines both your strengths, my mother had observed when I announced my career ambitions, your father's precision, and my love of words. My father had been more cautious. "It's a competitive field, Natalie, and not particularly stable." "Neither is building bridges," I'd countered, referencing his own profession. "But that doesn't stop you from designing them." He'd laughed at that, conceding the point. "Just make sure whatever you build has a solid foundation." I received my acceptance letter to Emerson College's Writing, Literature, and Publishing program on a rainy April morning my senior year of high school. My mother cried. My father calculated the cost of flights between Cedar Rapids and Boston. I stood in our kitchen, holding the letter, feeling the future opening before me like a book waiting to be read. Boston was everything Cedar Rapids wasn't: historic, cosmopolitan, literary to its core. I arrived as an 18-year-old with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and boundless ambition. My freshman dorm overlooked the Boston Common, and I spent that first semester in a state of perpetual wonder, exploring the city's bookstores, attending poetry slams in Cambridge, and spending hours in the Boston Public Library. I excelled academically, quickly distinguishing myself as someone with both technical skill and creative insight. By sophomore year, I had secured a coveted internship at Spencer and Marlowe, a respected independent publishing house specializing in literary fiction. By junior year, I was taking graduate-level courses and serving as the editor-in-chief of the College Literary Magazine. It was in Professor Mitchell's Literature of the American South seminar, fall semester of my senior year, that I first met David Reynolds. He sat across the seminar table, handsome in an understated way, with thoughtful, brown eyes and a slight crease between his brows when he concentrated. While other students competed to impress the professor with their literary analyses, David listened more than he spoke. But when he did contribute, his observations were incisive and original, cutting through pretension to the heart of the text. After class one evening, as we both lingered to continue a discussion about Flannery O'Connor's use of grotesque imagery, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee. That coffee turned into a 3-hour conversation that ranged from Southern Gothic literature to our shared Midwestern upbringings. He was from Columbus, Ohio, to our ambitions in publishing. I want to find the next great American voice, he told me, eyes alight with passion. Someone who changes how we see ourselves and each other. I want to help shape those voices, I replied. To be the first person who says yes, this matters to a writer who might otherwise go unheard. We started meeting regularly after class, then finding reasons to meet outside of class. Study sessions in the library led to dinner dates and entire weekends spent in his apartment off campus, talking about books and ideas and our futures in publishing. David was different from the boys I'd dated in high school, or the intellectual types I'd briefly connected with at Emerson. He was serious without being solemn, ambitious without being cutthroat, passionate about literature without being pretentious. He listened when I spoke, really listened, and valued my opinions even when they differed from his own. 3 months. After that first coffee, we stayed up all night in his apartment, surrounded by books and takeout containers, debating whether the unreliable narrator in a novel we were both reading was a brilliant literary device or a cheap trick. The question isn't whether it's brilliant or cheap, David had said, running a hand through his already tousled hair. It's whether it serves the story. Does it illuminate the truth or obscure it? I remember looking at him in that moment, truly, seeing him, and thinking, this is what it feels like when someone gets you completely. Later that night, as dawn broke over Boston, David kissed me for the first time. Not the hesitant, awkward kisses of previous relationships, but a kiss that felt like coming home to a place I hadn't known I was missing. I think I'm falling in love with you, Natalie Chen, he whispered against my lips. I think I might let you, I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. We graduated that spring, David with honors in English literature, me summa cum laude in writing, literature, and publishing. While our classmates scattered across the country for graduate school or entry-level publishing jobs in New York, we both chose to stay in Boston. David accepted an assistant editor position at Lockhart & Sons, a prestigious literary fiction publisher. I landed a similar role at Bennett House, known for discovering diverse voices in contemporary fiction. Our first apartment together was a third-floor walk-up in Jamaica Plain, tiny with slanted ceilings and unreliable plumbing, but filled with light and bookshelves we built ourselves. We spent weekends exploring Boston's neighborhoods, attending book launches, and building our personal library one carefully chosen volume at a time. Those early years were lean but happy. We lived on entry-level publishing salaries, take-out Chinese food, and dreams of the literary empire we would someday build together. In the evenings, we would read manuscripts together on our second-hand sofa, passing pages back and forth, debating character motivations and plot developments. You're better at seeing structural problems, David would say, handing me a manuscript he was considering. You're better at identifying unique voices, I would reply, passing him pages from a promising new author. Together, we felt unstoppable. Two literary minds working in tandem, each strengthening the other. 4 years into our relationship, on a crisp October evening at Soralina, David proposed. The ring was modest, a vintage sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, but perfectly me. I found it at that antique shop in Beacon Hill, he explained as I admired it in the restaurant's soft lighting. It reminded me of you, classic but unexpected. A story in every facet. Yes, I said before he could even ask the question formally. 1,000 times, yes. We married the following spring in the courtyard of the Boston Public Library, surrounded by books and our closest friends and family. My parents flew in from Cedar Rapids, my father shaking David's hand firmly before pulling him into an unexpected hug. "Take care of my girl," he had said, emotion making his voice gruff. "Always." David had promised, a promise he would keep for a while. The early years of our marriage continued our upward trajectory. David was promoted to associate editor at Lockhart & Sons after acquiring a debut novel that became a surprise bestseller and National Book Award finalist. I moved from Bennett House to Whitman & Yale, a larger publisher where I launched a successful imprint focused on women's voices from around the world. We pushed each other professionally, reading each other's acquisitions, offering honest feedback, celebrating each other's successes as our own. When I had doubts about a manuscript that seemed promising but flawed, David would stay up late helping me identify what was working and what wasn't. When he struggled with an author whose brilliant writing was matched by a difficult personality, I would talk him through strategies for maintaining the creative relationship without sacrificing his sanity. "We're the perfect team," he would say, and I believed him. 6 years into our marriage, we were both thriving professionally. David had been promoted to senior editor at Lockhart & Sons, the youngest in the company's history. I had been recruited by Caldwell Press to lead their flagship literary imprint, nearly doubling my salary and giving me unprecedented autonomy in acquisition decisions. With our increased income, we purchased a spacious condo in a converted factory, building downtown, an urban loft with exposed brick walls, factory windows, and enough space for the library of our dreams. We spent months designing custom bookshelves, deliberating over reading chairs, debating the merits of track lighting versus lamps for optimal reading conditions. "The library should be the heart of our home," David had insisted, and I agreed wholeheartedly. The finished space exceeded even our grand visions: floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with carefully organized books, a rolling ladder like the one we'd dreamed of in our first apartment, comfortable reading chairs positioned to catch the best natural light, a custom table where we could spread out manuscripts and work side by side. Our home was featured in a local lifestyle magazine under the headline "Literary Love Nest Inside Editor's Dream Library." The article described us as Boston Publishing's power couple, as perfectly matched as complementary texts in a well-curated anthology. We were living the life we had mapped out together in graduate school, our personal and professional dreams manifesting exactly as planned. Or so I thought. The first hint that our carefully edited life contained inaccuracies came 7 years into our marriage, though I didn't recognize it at the time. David began staying late at the office more frequently, claiming a demanding new author required extra attention. His phone would buzz at odd hours, and he would step out of rooms to take calls, returning with vague explanations about work emergencies. I believed him without question. Why wouldn't I? Publishing is notorious for its unpredictable schedules and demanding authors. I had pulled plenty of late nights myself, rushing to meet production deadlines or soothing writers' anxieties. David's dedication to his authors was one of the qualities I admire most about him. When he began attending more industry events without me, I attributed it to networking necessities. When our weekend rituals of browsing bookstores and reading together became less frequent, I blamed our increasingly busy professional lives. When intimacy between us grew more scheduled than spontaneous, I told myself it was a normal evolution in a long-term relationship. I was editing our marriage as carefully as I edited manuscripts, cutting questionable sections, smoothing inconsistencies, reshaping the narrative into something that made sense, something that preserved the story I wanted to believe. The cracks in our foundation became more difficult to ignore at the Publishing Innovation Conference in Chicago 8 years into our marriage. David was supposed to join me for the 3-day event. We had planned to present a joint session on nurturing new literary voices. 2 days before we were scheduled to leave, he called from the office. "I can't make it to Chicago," he said, his voice tense. "Jackson's manuscript is a disaster, and we're already behind on production deadlines. If I don't get it fixed this weekend, we'll miss our fall list." Jackson was David's most successful author, a literary wunderkind whose debut had won the TI National Book Award and whose highly anticipated second novel was already generating buzz. I understood the pressure David was under to help deliver a worthy follow-up. Of course, I said, swallowing my disappointment. I'll handle our session alone. Do you want me to bring back anything from that bookstore you love on Michigan Avenue? You're the best, he replied, relief evident in his voice. And yes, see if they have any first editions of Updike. I'll make this up to you when you get back. I went to Chicago alone, reworked our joint presentation into a solo one, and picked up a signed first edition of Rabbit Run that cost more than I'd intended to spend. I called David each night from my hotel room, getting his voicemail most times, hearing exhaustion in his voice when he did answer. How's it going with Jackson's manuscript? I asked on the second night. Slow progress, he sighed. This would be easier if you were here. No one identifies structural problems like you do. His words warmed me, erasing the faint uneasiness I'd been feeling. This was us, partners in literature and life, supporting each other's careers even when it meant temporary separation. When I returned from Chicago, David was distracted, the dark circles under his eyes testifying to long hours spent editing. He seemed genuinely thrilled with the Updike first edition, placing it carefully on our special shelf reserved for the most precious books in our collection. You spoil me, he said, kissing my forehead. Someone should, I replied, wrapping my arms around him and breathing in his familiar scent, except it wasn't entirely familiar. There was something different, something I couldn't quite identify. A new cologne, perhaps? I dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. David had been practically living at the office. He probably hadn't even had time to shower, let alone change his cologne. That night, as David slept beside me, I found myself staring at the ceiling, troubled by an inexplicable sense that something had shifted during my absence. Not a dramatic change, but a subtle realignment, like a book slightly out of place on an otherwise perfectly arranged shelf. I turned toward my sleeping husband, studying his profile in the dim light filtering through our bedroom windows. He was still David, my David, the boy who had discussed Flannery O'Connor with me until dawn, the man who had built a library with me book by book, the editor who could spot a distinctive literary voice from the first paragraph. Wasn't he? The weathered brick building that housed Emerson College's graduate writing program stood in stark contrast to the sleek high-rises surrounding it. On a crisp September morning 13 years ago, I climbed the worn stone steps, clutching a leather messenger bag containing 3 novels, a notebook, and my laptop. It was my first day of Professor Mitchell's Literature of the American South seminar, and I was 20 minutes early, a habit my father had instilled in me since childhood. The seminar room was empty except for one other person, a tall man with dark hair pulled back in a small ponytail, arranging chairs around the oval table. He looked up as the door closed behind me, his serious expression softening into a smile. Please tell me you're here for Mitchell's class, and I haven't been rearranging furniture in the wrong room for 15 minutes, he said. Southern Lit. With Mitchell, 9 a.m., I confirmed, setting my bag on the table. I'm Natalie Chen. David Reynolds, he replied, extending his hand. Fellow early arriver. I've learned that if you're exactly on time to Mitchell's classes, you're actually 10 minutes late. The man starts discussing Faulkner the moment he crosses the threshold. His handshake was firm, his eyes warm and intelligent. I noted the coffee, stain on his button-down shirt, the dog-eared copy of As I Lay Dying, protruding from his backpack, the ink smudges on his fingers. A serious reader, not just a serious student? You've taken classes with him before? I asked, selecting a seat near the window. David nodded, taking the chair adjacent to mine. 2 last year. The man's brilliant but moves at warp speed. If you don't capture his tangents, you miss half the education. Our conversation flowed easily as we waited for others to arrive, comparing our undergraduate experiences, mine at Emerson, his at Ohio State, our specializations, my focus on emerging voices in contemporary fiction, his on Southern and Midwestern, literary traditions, our aspirations in publishing, my dream of launching an imprint for underrepresented writers, his ambition to revitalize interest in regional American literature. By the time Professor Mitchell burst through the door, a whirlwind of tweed and enthusiasm, launching immediately into a comparison of Welty and O'Connor before even setting down his briefcase, David and I had established a rapport that felt surprisingly comfortable for two strangers. Throughout that first 3-hour seminar, I found myself repeatedly catching David's eye across the table, sharing looks of appreciation at Mitchell's insights, exchanging smiles at the professor's theatrical recitations of passages, mutual grimaces when less prepared students made, obviously misguided comments. As we packed up our things afterward, David hesitated beside me. "I don't suppose you'd want to continue our conversation about narrative unreliability over coffee. There's a decent place around the corner that doesn't completely burn their beans." "High praise indeed," I laughed. "Lead the way." The decent place turned out to be a tiny independent coffee shop tucked between a vintage record store and a used bookshop. The interior was all mismatched furniture, local art, and the rich aroma of properly brewed coffee. We claimed a small table by the window, ordered pour-overs, and resumed our discussion as if there had been no interruption. "So you're saying the first-person perspective in As I Lay Dying isn't meant to be reliable at all?" David challenged, stirring his coffee with unnecessary vigor. "That Faulkner intentionally constructed contradicting accounts?" "Not exactly," I countered. "I think the contradictions reveal different facets of truth. The family members aren't lying. They're each perceiving reality through their own limited perspective. It's Faulkner's way of saying objective truth is unattainable." David leaned forward, eyes alight with intellectual engagement. "But if objective truth is unattainable, how do we judge the character's actions? How do we know who to trust?" "That's precisely the point," I said. "We're forced to be active readers, weighing each account against the others, constructing our own understanding. Just like in real life, we never have perfect information about other people's motivations." Our coffee grew cold as we debated, the afternoon sun shifting position and casting long shadows across our table. What had been intended as a quick post-class discussion expanded into a wide-ranging conversation about literature, ethics, the purpose of fiction, and the role of editors in shaping cultural narratives. "Wait," David said, glancing at his watch, with surprise. "It's after 5. We've been talking for nearly 8 hours." I checked my own watch, equally startled. I completely missed my 2 o'clock meeting with my advisor. "I was supposed to pick up my sister from the airport at 4, David admitted, running a hand through his hair in dismay. "She's probably wondering if I've been hit by a bus." We exchanged phone numbers as we hurriedly gathered our things, promising to continue our conversation soon. Walking back to my apartment that evening, I felt a peculiar lightness, a sense of having encountered someone who matched my intellectual energy in a way I'd rarely experienced. 2 days later, David texted, "Found this essay on unreliable narration that makes your point better than I did. Hate to admit defeat, but intellectual honesty demands it. Coffee tomorrow to discuss terms of my surrender?" This began a pattern. We would meet for coffee after Mitchell's class, intending to discuss the assigned reading for an hour, and find ourselves still deep in conversation as the cafe closed around us. Our debates were passionate but never combative, each of us challenging the other's ideas while respecting the intellectual framework behind them. David introduced me to obscure, Midwestern authors whose work had been overshadowed by their coastal counterparts. I shared my favorite translations of Latin American magical realists who had influenced my own writing. We exchanged books like others might exchange gifts, each carefully selected to either challenge or reinforce the other's literary perspectives. "Read this," David said one afternoon, sliding a worn paperback across the table. "Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio. Brilliant portrayal of small-town American life, the quiet desperation, the thwarted ambitions, the moments of unexpected beauty." The following week, I handed him Jhumpa Lahiri's Interpreter of Maladies. "Here's another perspective on alienation and belonging," I said. Different context, similar emotional truths. We established rituals without consciously deciding to do so. Coffee at Horizon Brew after Mitchell's class. Saturday afternoons browsing used bookstores in Cambridge. Sunday mornings at the Boston Public Library, sitting side by side at a long wooden table, reading silently except to occasionally share a particularly striking passage. 6 weeks into this pattern, during a rainy Saturday spent wandering through bookstores, David paused in front of a display of romantic classics. "You know," he said, picking up a copy of Jane Eyre, "we spend all this time discussing literary theory and narrative technique, but we've never talked about the most basic question readers ask. Do you believe in love stories?" I considered the question carefully. Not the simplistic ones, not love at first sight or perfect soulmates, but the complicated ones, Rochester and Jane, with all their flaws and obstacles. Yes, I believe in those. The ones built on shared understanding rather than mere attraction, David nodded. The ones where two people recognize something essential in each other that others don't see. He replaced the book on the shelf, his fingers lingering on its spine. Like when you meet someone and realize they're reading the same internal book you are, just a few chapters ahead or behind. Our eyes met across the narrow bookstore aisle, and something shifted between us, a recognition that we were no longer discussing fictional characters. 2 nights later, I was in my apartment struggling with a paper on Carson McCullers when my laptop crashed, taking 3 hours of unsaved work with it. In a panic, I called David, who arrived at my door 20 minutes later with his own laptop and 2 large coffees. "We'll reconstruct it," he promised, setting up camp at my kitchen table. "I remember most of your arguments from when you were telling me about it on Sunday. We worked through the night, David helping me rebuild my thesis point by point. As dawn broke over Boston, casting golden light across my tiny kitchen, I looked at the reconstructed paper on the screen, then at David, rumpled, exhausted, eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "I don't know how to thank you," I said quietly. He looked up, a tired smile spreading across his face. "You already have. You listened to my tedious analysis of Midwest agricultural imagery in literature for 3 hours last week. This makes us even." I laughed, and perhaps it was the exhaustion, or the relief of salvaging my work, or simply the culmination of weeks of growing connection, but something propelled me forward. I kissed him, quickly and impulsively, then pulled back, suddenly, uncertain. David looked surprised for only a moment before his expression softened. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek. "I've been wanting to do that since you argued that Faulkner's sentence structure was a deliberate subversion of literary convention," he admitted. "That was the sexiest literary analysis I've ever heard." "Only you would find sentence structure sexy," I teased, but my heart was racing. "Only you would understand why it is," he countered, leaning in to kiss me properly. After that morning, our relationship evolved naturally from intellectual companionship to something deeper. Our coffee discussions and bookstore wanderings continued, but now they included the casual intimacy of held hands, shared desserts, and goodbye kisses that lingered longer each time. In Professor Mitchell's seminar, we maintained our academic focus, though our classmates soon noticed the change in our dynamic. Mitchell himself commented on it after class one day, his eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I see you two have discovered that literary analysis isn't the only chemistry worth exploring," he observed wryly. "Just remember that the best relationships, like the best literature, require both passion and careful reading." As the semester progressed, we began integrating our separate lives. David introduced me to his small circle of friends, fellow graduate, students and young publishing professionals who welcomed me warmly. I brought him to gatherings with my Emerson classmates, where he charmed everyone with his unpretentious literary knowledge and genuine interest in their work. We discovered our complementary working styles almost immediately. David was big picture, instinctively grasping the heart of a story, but sometimes missing technical issues. I was detail-oriented, able to identify structural problems and inconsistencies that others overlooked. Together, we formed a formidable editorial team, even as students. For our final project in Mitchell's class, we chose to co-author a paper analyzing recurring symbolism across multiple Southern authors. The process revealed how seamlessly we could collaborate, building on each other's ideas, respectfully challenging weak points, merging our distinct voices into a cohesive whole. "You realize we're kind of terrifying as a team, right?" David said as we put the finishing touches on our paper, which had grown to nearly twice the required length. "Mitchell's going to regret pairing us up. Or he'll take credit for creating the next great editorial partnership in American publishing," I countered. David looked up from the laptop, his expression suddenly serious. "Is that what you think we could be? Partners professionally, not just personally?" The question took me by surprise. Not because it hadn't occurred to me, but because it had, repeatedly, and I'd been afraid to voice it first. "I think we bring out the best in each other's work," I said carefully. "The way we think about literature, about what makes good writing, there's an alignment there that's rare." "More than rare," David said, closing the laptop and taking both my hands in his. "Natalie, when I'm working with you, I'm better than when I am alone. The way you see structure, the way you catch nuances I miss. It's like having access to a different part of my own brain. And I hope, I will do something similar for you." "You do," I admitted. "You help me see the forest when I'm fixated on the trees. You remind me why the work matters when I get lost in the details." He squeezed my hands, his eyes alight with possibility. "So, imagine what we could accomplish together, professionally. Identifying new voices, shaping important works, maybe eventually our own imprint or literary journal. The Reynolds-Chen Literary Renaissance," I suggested with a smile. "The Chen Reynolds Revolution," he countered, grinning. "Ladies first, alphabetically superior." We spent that night sketching out grandiose plans for our future in publishing, the authors we would discover, the literary movements we would champion, the cultural conversations we would influence. Some of it was the natural optimism of young graduates on the cusp of their careers, but underlying the specifics was a solid foundation, the certainty that whatever we did, we wanted to do it together. As the semester ended and winter break approached, we faced our first separation. David returning to Columbus for 3 weeks with his family, me flying to Cedar Rapids to spend Christmas with my parents. The night before his flight, David came to my apartment with a wrapped package and an unusually solemn expression. "It's not actually Christmas yet," he said, handing me the gift. "But I wanted to give you this before we both leave." I unwrapped it carefully to find a first edition of Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking, a book I had mentioned admiring but couldn't afford in the first edition. "David," I breathed, opening it to find Didion's signature on the title page. "This is too much. How did you even find a signed copy?" "I have connections," he said mysteriously, then laughed at my skeptical expression. "Okay, I spent 2 weeks calling every rare book dealer in New England, but it's worth it. Read the inscription." I turned to the front page, where David had written in his distinctive slanted handwriting, "For Natalie, who taught me that the most important stories are the ones we write together. Here's to our next chapter. All my love, David." Looking up from the book, I found him watching me intently. "I love you, Natalie," he said simply. "I think I have since you argued with me about Faulkner's comma usage. I just wanted you to know that before we spend 3 weeks texting about our families, holiday madness." I set the book carefully aside and moved into his arms. "I love you too," I said against his shoulder. "And not just because you buy me expensive first editions." "That's a relief," he murmured into my hair, "because that was the only one I could afford on a graduate student budget. I'll have to rely on my charm and literary knowledge from here on out. Those should suffice, I assured him, raising my face for his kiss. The 3 weeks apart only confirmed what we already knew, that whatever we had found together was worth building a future on. We returned to Boston in January more committed than ever, both to each other and to our shared vision of a life in literature. When we graduated that spring, David with his master's in English literature, me with my MFA in creative writing and publishing, we faced the pivotal decision of what came next. Most of our classmates were scattering to New York, Chicago, San Francisco, wherever entry-level publishing jobs could be found. We should consider New York, David said as we scrolled through job listings in his apartment one evening. That's where the major houses are. More opportunities, faster advancement. I looked around at the apartment we had gradually made ours, my books mingling with his on the shelves, my favorite throw blanket on his couch, the framed print of Hemingway's Key West house we'd bought together at a gallery showing. What if we stayed in Boston? I suggested. The publishing scene is smaller, but there are good independent houses here. We could build something unique without getting lost in the New York shuffle. David considered this, turning away from his laptop to face me. You really want to stay? I want to be wherever we can build our vision together, I said honestly. But yes, I've come to love Boston. It feels like home in a way no place has since I left Cedar Rapids. And the literary community here is supportive, not just competitive. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I feel it too. New York is where people go to make their names, but Boston might be where we can make something lasting. He reached for my hand. So we stay. We find jobs here, build our foundation, and create our own literary empire from the ground up. Starting small, I cautioned. But dreaming big, he finished with a smile. We began our job search in earnest, focusing on Boston-based publishers. The market was tighter than New York, but our networking during graduate school paid off. David secured an assistant editor position at Lockhart & Sons, a respected independent publisher known for literary fiction. 2 weeks later, I was offered a similar role at Bennett House, a smaller press with a growing reputation for diverse voices. The jobs were entry-level. The salaries barely enough to cover Boston rent, but they were footholds in the industry we loved. More importantly, they allowed us to stay together, building both our careers and our relationship in the city that had brought us together. That summer, we found our first apartment, a third-floor walk-up in Jamaica Plain with slanted ceilings, creaky floors, and wonderful natural light. The rent stretched our combined budgets, but the space had built-in bookshelves in the living room and a small office nook that could fit both our desks if we arranged them just so. Moving day was chaotic, exhausting, and oddly exhilarating. My parents drove a small U-Haul from Cedar Rapids with my books and childhood furniture. David's sister flew in from Columbus to help, bringing boxes of his collection shipped from his parents' house. By sunset, we were surrounded by stacks of books, mismatched furniture, and empty takeout containers. It's a disaster, I laughed, surveying the chaos from our position on the floor, the couch still being blocked by towers of boxes. It's perfect, David contradicted, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. It's the first page of our story together. The exposition is always a little messy. I leaned into him, taking in the magnitude of what we were beginning, not just cohabitation, but the merging of our lives, dreams, and futures. What do you think the plot will be? I asked. David pressed a kiss to my temple. I don't know the specifics yet, he said, but I know the theme. Which is? Two people who love books almost, as much as they love each other, building something meaningful together. He gestured grandly at our book-filled chaos. Consider this the prologue. The real story is just beginning. How could I have known then that all stories, even the most promising ones, can take unexpected turns? That the most carefully plotted narratives sometimes contain hidden twists their readers never see coming? That the characters we think we know best can surprise us in ways both wonderful and devastating. But on that night, surrounded by the physical manifestations of our shared past and imagined future, I believed completely in the story we were writing together. A story I thought would unfold exactly as we had outlined it, chapter by carefully constructed chapter. "I think this is the one," David said, his voice echoing in the empty industrial space. Sunlight streamed through massive factory windows, casting geometric patterns across the concrete floors. "Can't you feel it?" I walked to the center of the open loft, turning slowly to take in the exposed brick walls, the steel support beams, the soaring 14-foot ceilings. After 2 years of saving, countless open houses, and 3 failed bids, we were standing in what could become our home, a corner unit in a converted textile factory on the edge of Boston's Fort Point Channel district. "It's going to require a lot of work," I cautioned, though I was already mentally placing furniture, designing bookshelves, imagining our life unfolding in this dramatic space. "And it's at the very top of our budget." David came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "But think of what we could create here. The library along that wall, a writing nook by those windows, space to entertain all those authors will I be publishing." I leaned back against him, allowing myself to imagine it. We'd been in our Jamaica Plain apartment for 5 years, a perfectly adequate starter home that had begun to feel cramped as our book collections expanded and our professional lives accelerated. The raise that came with my promotion to senior editor at Bennett House, combined with David's recent jump to Lockhart & Sons' prestigious fiction division, had finally put home ownership within reach. "We'd need to gut the kitchen," I said, my practical side still performing due diligence. "Completely," David agreed, "but we could design it exactly as we want. No more cramped counters or insufficient storage. The bathroom needs a total overhaul. Imagine a clawfoot tub under that window. Morning light while you read in the bath." I smiled at how well he knew my habits, my secret indulgence of reading in near-scalding water until my fingers pruned and the pages grew wavy from steam. "We'd be house poor for a while," I reminded him, turning in his arms to face him. "No fancy dinners, no impromptu weekend trips. We'll cook at home and explore Boston on foot," he countered, his eyes alight with the same enthusiasm he showed when discovering a promising new manuscript. "Our entertainment budget can go toward building the library." I looked around the space once more, allowing myself to fully embrace the vision David was painting. "It could be amazing," I admitted. "Not just a home, but our home, built specifically for the way we live." "The Chen Reynolds Literary Salon," he declared grandly, "where future Pulitzer winners will gather to discuss the nature of truth and beauty. And where we'll eat ramen for dinner because we spent our food budget on first editions," I added with a laugh. "Worth it," David insisted. He took my hands. In his expression growing serious. "What do you think, Nat? Really? I know it's a stretch financially, and the renovation would be a huge project. But I can see us here, building something unique, a space that reflects everything we value and everything we want to become. Together." Standing in that empty industrial shell that held so much potential, I knew we were making a decision about more than real estate. We were choosing the container for the next chapter of our life together, the physical manifestation of our shared dreams and ambitions. "Let's do it," I said, the last of my hesitation dissolving in the face of David's enthusiasm and my own growing excitement. "Let's make an offer." His face lit up with the boyish excitement that still, after 7 years together, made my heart skip. He picked me up and spun me around in the empty loft, our laughter bouncing off the brick walls and concrete floors. "The best decision since you agreed to get coffee with me after Mitchell's class," he declared, setting me down but keeping his arms around me. "Let's hope the sellers agree," I cautioned. They did. Our offer, ambitious but not quite our financial breaking point, was accepted 2 days later. What followed was a whirlwind of mortgage applications, building inspections, and contractor meetings. We took out a slightly larger loan than we'd planned, justifying it by the potential increase in property value once renovations were complete. The renovation itself became a crash course in compromise, budget management, and patience. We discovered quickly that our tastes, while compatible in literature, sometimes diverged in design. David favored industrial minimalism that honored the building's factory origins. I leaned toward warm textures and colors that would soften the space. Our disagreements were never serious, but required constant negotiation. The exposed ductwork is essential to the industrial aesthetic, David insisted during one design meeting. But we can paint it a warmer color than galvanized metal, I countered. Something that won't make the ceiling feel like a commercial kitchen. We found middle ground in a dark bronze finish that preserved the industrial character while adding warmth. This pattern repeated throughout the renovation, David advocating for architectural authenticity, me pushing for livability and comfort, each of us yielding where it mattered most to the other. The one aspect where we achieved perfect synchronicity was the library. We designed it together, sketching possibilities during late nights at our Jamaica Plain apartment, surrounded by architecture books and interior design magazines. Floor-to-ceiling shelves along the brick wall, David proposed, drawing rapid lines on graph paper, with a rolling ladder like the old bookstores have, and a reading alcove in that corner where the windows meet, I added, taking the pencil from his hand to sketch my vision. Deep window seats with storage underneath for literary journals and manuscripts. 2 reading chairs positioned to catch the afternoon light, he continued, with a table between them for coffee cups and notepads. And a larger work table where we can spread out materials when we're editing together, I finished. The library became the heart of our renovation, the space that would define our home and reflect our shared passion. We allocated the largest portion of our budget to custom bookshelves crafted by a local woodworker who specialized in library installations. The rolling ladder was an extravagance that required eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch for 3 months, but neither of us regretted it. 8 months after closing, we finally moved into our renovated loft. The space was transformed. Concrete floors softened with area rugs, factory windows fitted with custom treatments that diffused harsh light, the kitchen rebuilt with warm wood cabinetry and professional-grade appliances that honored David's unexpected passion for cooking. The bathroom featured the clawfoot tub David had promised, positioned beneath a window with privacy glass that allowed light without exposure. The primary bedroom was a retreat of calm neutrals and natural textures, designed to promote rest in our otherwise stimulating environment. But the library, that was the showpiece. One entire wall of the open-plan main space was dedicated to books, the custom shelves rising to the 14-foot ceiling, accessible via the brass rolling ladder that gleamed in the morning light. Our carefully curated collection, meticulously organized by genre, period, and personal significance, filled about 2/3 of the available space. Room to grow, as David noted with satisfaction. 2 leather reading chairs, invested in despite their cost because we'll have them forever, faced the wall of windows overlooking the channel. Between them stood a small table that had belonged to my grandmother, refinished to match our new aesthetic. In the center of the library area, a large oak table with simple, clean lines provided workspace for our collaborative projects. The evening we finished arranging the last of our books, we celebrated with an expensive bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. Sitting in our reading chairs, glasses in hand, we surveyed our creation with quiet pride. "It's better than I imagined," I said softly, taking in the space that so perfectly reflected our shared vision. "It's exactly what I envisioned that first day we walked through," David replied. "A space designed around the things that matter most to us: books, ideas, creative work." He raised his glass. "To our literary sanctuary." "To our home," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. That night, curled against David in our new bedroom, Listening to the unfamiliar sounds of our new neighborhood, I felt a profound sense of rightness, as though all the choices that had led us to this place had been correct, all the sacrifices worthwhile. We had built something meaningful together, not just a physical space, but a life structured around shared values and ambitions. Our home quickly became the center of our personal and professional lives. Weekend mornings found us in our reading, chairs, coffee mugs on the side table, books or manuscripts in hand, occasionally reading passages aloud to each other when something delighted or intrigued us. The ritual reminded me of our early days in Professor Mitchell's class, that initial intellectual connection that had drawn us together. Weekday evenings often saw us at the oak table, working side by side on different projects but connected by proximity and purpose. I might be reviewing submissions for my women's fiction imprint while David edited the latest draft from one of his literary authors, but we would pause periodically to share insights or ask advice. Listen to this opening. Paragraph, David would say, reading aloud from a promising manuscript. The voice is so distinct, it reminds me of early Joan Didion, but with a Midwestern sensibility. Or I would slide pages across the table. What do you think of this structure? The timeline jumps are ambitious, but I'm worried they're confusing. The emotional arc. We became known among our friends and colleagues for our dinner parties, intimate gatherings where conversations about literature and publishing extended late into the night. Our large industrial kitchen island became the central gathering point, guests perched on stools with wine glasses in hand, while David prepared elaborate meals that showcased his growing culinary skills. The secret to a perfect risotto is patience, he would explain to our assembled friends, stirring constantly as he added stock one ladle at a time. Much like editing, you can't rush the process if you want depth and complexity. These evenings inevitably migrated to the library area, where discussions about books and ideas flowed as freely as the wine. Looking around our loft during these gatherings, seeing it filled with interesting people engaged in passionate conversations about literature, I would catch David's eye across the room and feel a surge of gratitude for the life we had created together. Our professional lives flourished, alongside our domestic ones. 3 years after moving into the loft, I was promoted to editorial director at Bennett House, the youngest person to hold the position in the company's history. My imprint, focused on women's voices from diverse backgrounds, had produced 2 National Book Award finalists and 1 Pulitzer nominee. I was profiled in Publishers Weekly as one of publishing's rising stars and invited to speak at industry conferences about diversifying the literary landscape. David's career trajectory was equally impressive. His keen eye for literary talent led to the discovery of Jackson Porter, a former high school English teacher whose debut novel about small-town Midwestern life became an unexpected bestseller and critical darling. The book's success elevated David's profile at Lockhart & Sons, resulting in his promotion to executive editor and greater autonomy in acquisition decisions. "We're doing it," he said one evening as we celebrated his promotion with champagne in our reading chairs. "Building our literary empire, just like we planned in grad school." "One book at a time," I agreed, clinking my glass against his. We were approaching our 8th anniversary when a local lifestyle magazine contacted us about featuring our loft in a spread about creative spaces. The reporter who interviewed us described us as Boston Publishing's power couple, noting how our home reflected our literary partnership. "The Reynolds Loft isn't just a stylish space," she wrote in the resulting article. "It's a testament to the couple's shared vision and complementary sensibilities. Like the books they champion professionally, their home tells a compelling story about who they are and what they value." The article, accompanied by professional photographs that captured our space more beautifully than I'd ever seen it, generated unexpected attention. We received emails from design blogs requesting additional features, invitations to join cultural boards, and even an inquiry from a local university about teaching a joint seminar on literary editing. We've become minor celebrities in our tiny corner of the publishing world, David joked as we reviewed the latest batch of correspondence generated by the article. Next thing you know, they'll be asking for our autographs at literary festivals. As long as they're still asking about our author's work too, I replied. That's what actually matters. David set aside the emails and pulled me onto his lap in one of our reading chairs. Always keeping us grounded, he said, nuzzling my neck. That's why we make such a good team. I get distracted by the shiny accolades. You remind me of the substance behind them. Speaking of substance, I said, shifting. To face him, have you thought more about the literary journal idea? The one we've been talking about since grad school? In recent months, we'd revisited our early dream of starting a journal focused on experimental fiction from emerging voices, a platform for writers taking formal and thematic risks that larger commercial publishers might shy away from. I have, he said, his expression growing serious. I think we're almost there financially, and our professional networks are strong enough now to attract submissions from writers we actually want to publish. We'd need seed funding for the first few issues, I cautioned, until subscriptions and maybe grants could sustain it. We've been saving, David reminded me. That consulting work I did for the university press last year, your advance for the editing guide, we could divert those funds from the renovation budget. We had been planning a modest update to our guest bathroom and office area, but the literary journal had always been our long-term professional dream, the perfect melding of our editorial visions and shared ambition to shape literary culture. Let's do it, I decided, feeling the same excitement I'd felt when we agreed to buy the loft. Let's start drawing up a business plan and editorial mission statement. David's face lit up with enthusiasm. We could launch with a special issue featuring cross-genre work, pieces that blur the lines between fiction, memoir, and cultural criticism. With a focus on voices traditionally underrepresented in literary publishing, I added, creating space for stories that challenge conventional narrative structures. We spent the rest of the evening brainstorming at our oak table, filling pages with ideas about format, design, potential contributors, and distribution strategies. It felt like our graduate school days again. That same intellectual synchronicity, the spark of creation that had drawn us together initially and continued to energize our relationship. The Chen Reynolds Review, David said, writing the potential title at the top of a fresh page. Or maybe the Reynolds-Chen Literary Quarterly? What about something less about us and more about the journal's mission? I suggested. Convergence or intersections? Something that reflects the crossing of genres and perspectives we want to showcase. David considered this, tapping his pen against the paper. You're right. It shouldn't be about us. The work should be the focus. He wrote convergence on the page, circling it thoughtfully. I like that. It speaks to what we're trying to create, a meeting place for diverse literary approaches. As midnight approached, our initial brainstorming session had produced a solid framework for the journal, its editorial focus, potential structure, and preliminary budget. We'd divided responsibilities according to our strengths. I would handle manuscript selection and editorial development, while David would oversee design, production, and marketing. This feels right, I said as we finally prepared for bed, the pages of our planning session neatly stacked on the oak table for review in the morning, like the next logical step in our shared path. The realization of what we've been building toward all along, David agreed, switching off the library lights. He pulled me close as we walked toward our bedroom. Publishing's power couple created their own literary platform. It's very on brand for us. Is that how you see us? I asked, curious rather than concerned. As a brand? David laughed softly, his arm warm around my waist. No, of course not. But you have to admit, we've cultivated a certain image in the industry, the literary power couple with the perfect loft and complementary editorial sensibilities. As long as we remember it's just the external packaging, I said, pausing in our bedroom doorway. The substance is what matters, the work we do, the authors we champion, the stories we help bring into the world. Always my moral compass, David murmured, kissing my forehead, keeping us focused on what actually matters. That night, I fell asleep with plans for convergence flowing through my mind, excited about this new chapter in our professional partnership. The journal represented the perfect synthesis of our individual strengths and shared vision, a creative venture that was uniquely ours, independent of our respective publishing houses. I couldn't have known then that while I was dreaming of our future literary endeavors, the foundation of our partnership was already beginning to crack, hairline fractures spreading beneath the polished surface of our carefully constructed life. Like the narrator in one of David's beloved experimental novels, I was utterly unaware of the plot twist approaching, still immersed in what I believed was the main narrative. The first sign came so subtly I nearly missed it entirely. David began staying later at the office, citing increased responsibilities with his expanded role at Lockhart & Sons. This wasn't unusual in publishing, where deadline crunches and author emergencies regularly disrupted normal working hours. I thought nothing of it, especially as I was often guilty of the same, losing track of time while deeply engaged with a manuscript or author consultation. When he started attending more industry events without me, book launches, author dinners, publishing conferences, I attributed it to our increasingly independent professional identities. We were both advancing in our careers, developing separate networks and responsibilities. It seemed natural that our schedules wouldn't always align perfectly. "Jackson's having another meltdown about the cover design," David explained one evening when canceling our dinner plans at the last minute. "I need to smooth things over with him and the art department before this escalates further." Jackson Porter, David's literary star, was known for being brilliantly talented but temperamental. His debut novel had won the National Book Award, and his highly anticipated follow-up was already generating significant industry buzz. Keeping Jackson happy had become a significant part of David's job, a responsibility he took seriously given the author's importance to Lockhart & Sons' prestige and bottom line. "Of course," I said, understanding the delicacy of author relations, especially with someone of Jackson's caliber. "Do whatever you need to do. I'll save you some of the risotto." "You're the best," David said, kissing me quickly before grabbing his jacket. "Don't wait up. This could take a while." These instances multiplied gradually. A missed dinner here, a canceled weekend plan there, increasingly frequent late nights at the office. The changes were incremental enough that I didn't recognize a pattern forming and didn't see the slow erosion of our shared time and rituals. Our weekend mornings in the reading chairs became less regular. The collaborative editing sessions at our oak table grew less frequent. Even our intimate dinner parties dwindled as David's schedule became more unpredictable. "We should have Eliza and Mark over soon," I suggested one rare evening when we were both home for dinner. "We haven't seen them in months." "Definitely," David agreed vaguely, his attention on his phone. "Let's look at the calendar this weekend and find a date that works." But the weekend would come, and the calendar consultation would be forgotten or postponed. Social plans remained in the realm of good intentions rather than concrete commitments. Was busy with my own career, managing a growing imprint and nurturing promising new authors, so I didn't immediately register the subtle shift in our dynamic. When I did notice David's increasing absences, I rationalized them as temporary, the natural consequence of our professional success and the demands that came with it. "It's just a particularly busy season," I told myself, ignoring the small voice that whispered that this season had been extending for months now. "Once Jackson's new book is launched, things will settle down." I believed this because I needed to believe it, because the alternative was to question the narrative we had constructed so carefully, to acknowledge the possibility that our perfectly designed life might contain fundamental flaws invisible to the casual observer. Like a skilled editor, missing crucial subtext, I failed to read between the lines of our changing relationship. Instead, I focused on the surface story, Two successful publishing professionals building their careers and creative partnership, occasionally separated by the demands of their work, but fundamentally united in purpose and passion. It was the story I had always believed we were writing together. The story I wanted desperately to be true. The Boston Literary Awards had always been a highlight of our professional calendar, an elegant evening celebrating the city's vibrant publishing community, held annually at the historic Copley Plaza Hotel. David and I attended together every year, arriving arm in arm, greeting colleagues and authors, celebrating wins and commiserating over losses with equal grace. This year was particularly significant. My imprint had 3 books nominated in major categories, including Anita Desai's powerful memoir that was favored to win Nonfiction Book of the Year. David had 2 nominations, including Jackson Porter's sophomore novel, widely considered the frontrunner for Fiction Book of the Year. "We could make history tonight," David said as we prepared for the event in our loft. "Husband and wife winning the 2 top categories in the same year. The Boston Globe would love that angle." I smiled at his reflection in the mirror as I fastened my earrings. Simple pearl drops that had belonged to my grandmother. Let's not jinx it. Gabriela Martinez's novel has been getting incredible reviews, and she could easily edge out Jackson. Always. "The pragmatist," David teased, adjusting his tie. Deep blue silk that complemented my navy dress. "This is why we balance each other so well. My irrational optimism, your clear-eyed realism." He came up behind me, placing his hands on my shoulders, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something unfamiliar in his expression, hesitation, perhaps, or uncertainty. But it passed so quickly I thought I might have imagined it. "You look beautiful," he said, dropping a kiss on my bare shoulder. "The editorial director everyone wants to work with and no one wants to go up against." "Careful," I laughed. "Your competitive side is showing?" "Just stating facts," he replied with a grin. "Now let's go collect some trophies." The Copley Plaza ballroom was transformed for the occasion. Soft lighting, elegant floral arrangements, tables arranged around a central stage where the awards would be presented. As we entered, I felt the familiar surge of pride being on David's arm, the 2 of us moving through the room as a unit, acknowledged as a power couple in Boston's literary world. "Natalie! David!" Miranda Evans, the president of the Boston Publishers Association, approached with outstretched hands. "Our dynamic duo? I've seated you at table 3 with the Lockhart contingent. Hope that's acceptable?" "Of course," David replied smoothly. "Though Natalie has more nominations than I do this year, so perhaps we should be at her publisher's table." "You're too kind," I said, squeezing his arm appreciatively. "The Lockhart table is perfect. Thank you, Miranda." As we made our way through the crowded room, accepting congratulations and exchanging pleasantries, I noticed how seamlessly David and I operated as a team, finishing each other's sentences, building on each other's observations, presenting a united front to the world. It was a dynamic we had perfected over years, this public performance of partnership that felt so natural it wasn't really a performance at all, or so I thought. We reached table 3, where several of David's colleagues from Lockhart & Sons were already seated. Robert Lockhart himself, the patrician publisher who rarely attended industry events, stood to greet us. "David, excellent timing. I was just telling everyone about Jackson's interview with the Times. The piece runs tomorrow, and it's magnificent. Should drive sales even higher when he wins tonight." He turned to me with a courteous nod. "Natalie, lovely as always. Your Anita Desai memoir is extraordinary. In any other year, it would be unbeatable." "High praise, Robert," I replied, refusing to be baited into the competition narrative. "But I think there's room for both our authors to shine tonight." As we took our seats, I scanned the table and noticed an unfamiliar face, a striking woman with copper hair cut in a sleek bob, wearing a black dress that managed to be both elegant and daring. David followed my gaze and cleared his throat. Ah, Natalie. Have you met Catherine Winters? She joined the comparative literature department at BU last fall. Catherine, my wife Natalie Chen. The woman extended a slender hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Natalie, I've heard so much about you. Your imprint at Bennett House is doing remarkable work. That Zadie Smith-esque novel you published last year was extraordinary. Thank you, I replied, genuinely pleased by her specific knowledge of my list. Are you involved in publishing, as well as academia? Catherine is consulting with us on a new literary criticism series, Robert Lockhart interjected. Her background in contemporary American fiction is unparalleled. She's been working closely with David on the project. Has she? I turned to David with raised eyebrows. You didn't mention a new series. There it was again, that fleeting look I couldn't quite decipher. Discomfort? Guilt? It vanished almost immediately, replaced by David's characteristic easy charm. It's still in the early stages, he explained. I was waiting until we had the concept more fully developed before boring you with the details. Your work could never bore me, I said lightly, though I felt a small knot forming in my stomach. David and I had always shared our professional projects, especially those in development. It was unlike him to keep something like this under wraps. Catherine has been instrumental in shaping the vision, David continued. Her insights into how academic theory can be made accessible to general readers have really expanded our thinking. Catherine smiled modestly. David gives me too much credit. He's the one with the instinct for what will resonate beyond academic circles. I observed their interaction with growing unease. There was an ease between them, a shorthand that suggested more familiarity than a typical consultant-editor relationship. The way David leaned slightly toward her when she spoke, the way she referenced conversations they'd clearly had outside of formal meetings. How long have you been working on this project? I asked, keeping my tone conversational. Since January, Catherine replied. About 4 months now. 4 months. During which David had never once mentioned her name or this project. The knot in my stomach tightened. Before I could pursue this further, the lights dimmed, and Miranda Evans took the stage to begin the awards presentation. I sat through the opening remarks and early categories in a state of distracted tension, my mind replaying the interaction with Catherine, searching for concrete reasons why it had unsettled me. Was I overreacting? Publishing is collaborative by nature, and consultants frequently work with editors on specialized projects. There was nothing inherently suspicious about David working with an attractive academic. Nothing except his silence about it, and that indefinable current I'd sensed between them. Natalie, David whispered, nudging me gently. They just announced the nonfiction Book of the Year nominees. They're showing clips from each. I pulled my attention back to the ceremony, watching as excerpts from each nominated book appeared on the large screen above the stage. When Anita Desai's powerful prose filled the room, I felt a surge of pride that momentarily displaced my unease. And the award for nonfiction Book of the Year goes to Anita Desai's Borders and Belonging, edited by Natalie Chen at Bennett House. The table erupted in polite applause. David squeezed my hand, his genuine pride evident. Congratulations, Nat. Well deserved. I made my way to the stage in a daze, accepted the crystal trophy, and delivered the speech I'd prepared, making sure to highlight Anita's incredible courage in telling her story. As I thanked my team at Bennett House, I caught David's eye in the audience. He was beaming at me, his expression one of unalloyed pride and support. For a moment, I felt foolish about my earlier concerns. This was David, my biggest champion and most dedicated supporter. How could I doubt his transparency over something as mundane as a work project? I returned to the table to warm congratulations, including an effusive compliment from Catherine about my acceptance speech. You captured the essence of why the book matters without making it about yourself. That's a rare gift, she said, and I found myself warming to her despite my lingering discomfort. The evening progressed through various categories, building toward the Fiction Book of the Year award. When Jackson Porter's novel was announced as the winner, David's enthusiasm was tempered by professional decorum. He applauded proudly, but remained seated as Jackson himself took the stage to accept. "This is why I love my job," David murmured to me as Jackson delivered a characteristically provocative acceptance speech. "Finding voices that challenge and elevate the conversation." "You have an exceptional eye," I agreed, and meant it. Whatever else might be happening, David's editorial instincts were undeniable. As the ceremony concluded and the event transitioned to its more social phase, I found myself separated from David as we were each drawn into different conversations. From across the room, I spotted him deep in discussion with Catherine, their heads bent close together over what appeared to be a cocktail napkin on which David was sketching something. "They make quite the intellectual pair, don't they?" Robert Lockhart's voice startled me. He had appeared at my elbow, following my line of sight. Catherine's theoretical framework combined with David's market instincts. It's a powerful combination for our new series. "Yes, they seem to work well together," I managed, trying to keep my tone neutral. "The series was Catherine's idea initially," Robert continued, oblivious to my discomfort. "She approached us last fall about bridging the gap between academic criticism and general interest publishing." I immediately thought of David to spearhead it from our side. Last fall. Even earlier than Catherine had indicated. Which meant David had been working with her for at least 6 months without ever mentioning it to me. "How did they meet?" I asked, unable to help myself. Robert looked momentarily confused. "At the Emerson alumni gathering last year, I believe. Catherine was giving a talk on contemporary fiction trends, and David was representing Lockhart on a publishing panel." He chuckled. "They apparently got into quite the debate about experimental fiction's commercial viability. Intellectual sparks flew, from what I heard. The Emerson event, nearly 9 months ago. David had attended alone because I was at a writer's retreat with one of my authors in Vermont. He'd mentioned the panels being standard industry fare, and nothing more. No mention of a spirited debate with a brilliant, beautiful literature professor. No mention of Catherine Winters at all." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of professional smiles and mechanical conversation. I accepted congratulations for Anita's win, discussed upcoming projects with colleagues, and maintained the expected social presence, all while a cold weight settled in my chest. On the ride home, David was ebullient, energized by Jackson's win and the positive industry response to Lockhart's upcoming list. "A perfect night," he declared as our Uber navigated the rain-slicked streets of Boston. "Both our authors took top prizes. The power couple dominates again." I murmured agreement, looking out at the passing cityscape, gathering my thoughts and courage. "Why didn't you tell me about Catherine Winters?" I asked finally, keeping my voice even, free of accusation. David's rhythm faltered only slightly. "What do you mean? I introduced you tonight. You never mentioned working with her on this literary criticism series. According to Robert, you've been developing it since last fall." "Oh, that," David waved dismissively. "It's been mostly conceptual until recently. Lots of theoretical discussions that wouldn't interest you." "Wouldn't interest me?" I turned to face him fully. "David, literary theory is literally what we bonded over when we met. Since when do you decide what would or wouldn't interest me? Professionally?" He had the grace to look discomfited. "That's not what I meant. It's just been so preliminary. Lots of false starts and conceptual dead ends. Not worth bringing home when we're both so busy with more concrete projects." "You met her at the Emerson event last year," I pressed. "The one you described as completely unremarkable." David's expression shifted subtly, a tightening around the eyes that I recognized as his tell when navigating difficult territory. "Did I?" "Yes, I suppose we were on a panel together. I meet so many people at these industry events, Nat." She didn't become relevant to my work until Robert brought her on as a consultant months later. The careful construction of his response, the precise way he was managing the timeline, it all felt rehearsed, as if he'd anticipated this conversation might eventually occur and had prepared for it. "She seems to think very highly of you," I observed, watching his reaction closely. "She's a respected academic who appreciates good editorial work," he replied smoothly. "We have a productive professional relationship. That's all." His answer was perfect, reasonable, appropriate, impossible to argue with. Yet something in his delivery rang false, like dialogue that looks right on the page but sounds unnatural when spoken aloud. We arrived home, the conversation suspended as we navigated the transition from car to building to elevator. Our loft welcomed us with the familiar comfort of our carefully designed space, the wall of books that represented our shared passion and history. David headed straight for the kitchen. "Nightcap?" he offered, already reaching for the whiskey we reserved for celebrations. "We should toast our victories properly." I declined, claiming fatigue, and retreated to our bedroom to remove my jewelry and evening dress. Standing before the mirror, I studied my reflection, searching for signs of the upheaval I felt internally. I looked exactly the same. Natalie? Chen, successful editor, one half of publishing's power couple. Yet something fundamental had shifted. Later, as David slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and methodically examined the facts, as I would assess a manuscript with structural problems. David had met Catherine Winters at least 9 months ago and never mentioned her. He had been working closely with her on a significant project for 6 months without ever bringing it up at home. When asked directly, he had minimized their connection and the project's importance. There was an unmistakable chemistry between them, intellectual at minimum, possibly more. None of these points, individually, proved anything beyond poor communication. Collectively, they formed a pattern that raised questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. I turned on my side, watching David's profile in the dim light filtering through our bedroom windows. His breathing was deep and regular, his expression peaceful. This was the face I had woken up beside for nearly a decade, the mind I had connected with over literature and ideas, the partner with whom I had built both a home and a professional identity. I wanted desperately to believe I was overreacting, manufacturing drama from innocent circumstances, seeing threats where none existed. Perhaps this was simply the natural evolution of a long-term partnership. Separate projects, independent professional relationships, less constant communication about work details. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had changed. That Catherine Winters represented not just a colleague David had failed to mention, but a shift in our foundation that I had somehow missed while focusing on the structure we'd built above it. Over the following weeks, I watched David more carefully, alert to patterns I might have previously overlooked. There were no dramatic revelations, no smoking gun evidence of impropriety. Instead, I noticed a collection of small changes that individually might mean nothing, but together formed a troubling mosaic. His phone, once carelessly left on countertops or coffee tables, now accompanied him everywhere, even to the shower. His work schedule, always demanding but previously predictable, became increasingly erratic, with late nights and weekend emergencies that couldn't be rescheduled. Our traditional Sunday morning reading ritual, once sacrosanct, was frequently interrupted by urgent emails he needed to address or calls he had to take in his home office. Most telling was a subtle shift in his engagement with my work. David had always been my first and most insightful reader, offering thoughtful feedback on manuscripts I was considering and helping me identify structural issues I might have missed. Now, when I asked his opinion, his responses were generic, lacking the specific insight that had made our professional collaboration so valuable. "This has potential," he would say, returning a manuscript I'd given him to read. "The voice is distinctive." "But what about the perspective shifts in the middle sections?" I would press. Do you think they're working or disrupting the narrative? Flow? They're an interesting choice, he would offer vaguely. Depends on what the author is trying to achieve. These non-committal responses were so unlike the David who had once stayed up all night debating the merits of second-person narration in a manuscript I was considering that they felt like communications from a different person entirely. I told myself I was being paranoid. David was under tremendous pressure at Lockhart & Sons, navigating Jackson Porter's demanding personality while managing an expanding list of authors. His distraction was professional, not personal. His vague feedback was a function of limited time and mental bandwidth, not diminished interest in our collaborative process. Then came the canceled anniversary dinner plans. Our 9th anniversary fell on a Thursday, a workday, but we had always made it a point to celebrate the actual date, regardless of professional obligations. Reservations at our favorite restaurant, thoughtful gifts that reflected our shared passion for literature, an evening dedicated to celebrating our partnership in all its dimensions. 2 days before the anniversary, David called from the office. I hate to do this, Nat, but I need to reschedule our dinner tomorrow night. Jackson is having an absolute meltdown about the paperback cover design. The sales conference is next week, and if we don't resolve this immediately, the entire release schedule could be jeopardized. The explanation was plausible, even predictable. Jackson Porter's temperamental genius was legendary in publishing circles, and the paperback release of his award-winning novel was a major priority for Lockhart & Sons. Still, the timing felt suspect. It has to be tomorrow night, I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Not tonight or Friday. Jackson's flying in specifically for this meeting, David explained, his voice carrying the harried tone of an editor caught between artistic integrity and commercial necessities. Trust me, I'm not happy about it either. But you know how crucial this title is for our list. I did know. I also knew that anniversaries matter, that prioritizing relationship milestones is a choice, and that David had previously moved mountains to protect our personal traditions from professional encroachment. We can celebrate this weekend instead, he continued, his tone brightening with forced optimism. I'll make reservations for Saturday at Soralina, more relaxed anyway, not having to rush from work. I agreed, of course. What else could I do? Challenge his professional commitment? Demand he prioritize dinner with me over a crucial meeting with his most important author? That wasn't who we were as a couple, wasn't the supportive partnership we'd built. Of course, I said. Handle what you need to with Jackson. We'll celebrate properly on Saturday. You're the best, David replied, relief evident in his voice. I promise I'll make it up to you. What happened next was not planned or premeditated. I didn't set out to test David or catch him in a lie. But as I returned to work after our call, a notification popped up on my computer screen. An email from a literary conference where both Jackson Porter and Catherine Winters were scheduled to speak that same Thursday evening, the night of our anniversary. The panel, titled Experimental Fiction in the Commercial Marketplace, was set to begin at 7:30 p.m. at the Boston Athenaeum, which meant Jackson Porter would be nowhere near Lockhart & Sons for an emergency cover design meeting when David had claimed. I stared at the screen, a cold clarity washing over me. The excuse was fabricated. The emergency was fictional. The question was, what was the real reason David was canceling our anniversary dinner? 1 year after that rainy night when I delivered divorce papers to my husband and his mistress, I sit in my new apartment overlooking Boston Harbor, speaking directly to you. Yes, you, the person who might be wondering if the pain will ever subside, if the betrayal will ever stop burning, if you'll ever feel whole again. I'm here to tell you it does, it will, you can. The journey from that night to this moment wasn't easy or linear. There were days when grief ambushed me in unexpected moments, while unpacking a box of books and finding one with David's notes. In the margin, hearing an author we'd both championed interviewed on the radio, walking past Soralina and remembering all the anniversaries we'd celebrated there before the final one he canceled. But here's what I discovered. Grief isn't the enemy. It's part of the healing process. It's how we honor what was real in relationships, even after they end painfully. The trick is not to let grief become your permanent address. You might wonder if I regret confronting David and Catherine that night. If I wish I had simply filed the papers through lawyers and walked away quietly. I don't. That moment of standing in my truth, of refusing to be a passive participant in my own life story, was transformative. It wasn't about revenge or public humiliation. It was about reclaiming my power and my narrative. The real transformation happened afterward, in the quiet moments when I had to decide who Natalie Chen would be without the identity of David's wife to define me. I chose to be someone who doesn't let betrayal harden her heart, who doesn't allow past pain to determine future choices, who recognizes that her worth was never dependent on someone else's ability to see it. My small furnished apartment gradually became a home. Not the dramatic industrial loft filled with custom bookshelves and designer furniture, but a space that reflected my singular vision rather than a compromise. I painted the walls a soft blue-gray that David would have considered too traditional, but that I found calming. I arranged my books by color rather than subject, creating a rainbow effect that prioritized beauty over academic organization. Small rebellions, perhaps, but meaningful ones. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was promoted to publisher at Bennett House, the position I'd been working toward my entire career. The promotion came with an office overlooking the Boston Public Garden and the authority to shape our entire literary list, not just my imprint. The irony wasn't lost on me that professional success arrived just as my personal life had imploded, challenging the notion that we must sacrifice one for the other. "You've seemed more decisive lately," my CEO remarked after I'd successfully advocated for acquiring a controversial memoir that other publishers had deemed too risky. "More willing to trust your instincts." He was right, though not for the reasons he imagined. Discovering David's betrayal had forced me to confront how often I'd edited my own instincts, how I'd noticed problems but chosen to revise my perception rather than acknowledge reality. I'd become a more decisive editor because I'd stopped second-guessing my internal warning system. 8 months post-divorce, I launched what would have been our literary journal, but with a different name and vision than what David and I had planned. Convergence became Divergence, focused on underrepresented voices in fiction that defied conventional narrative structures. The first issue featured 3 debut authors whose work had been rejected by major publishers for being too experimental or not commercially viable. One of those stories was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Another was optioned for a limited streaming series. The third launched a career that has since produced 2 acclaimed novels, proving, as I'd always believed, that the voices deemed too challenging by commercial gatekeepers often contain the most necessary truths. David sent me a note when the first issue was published, a brief email acknowledging my accomplishment. "This is what you were always meant to create," he wrote. "Independent, uncompromising visionary. Congratulations." I didn't reply, not out of lingering anger, but because there was nothing left to say. Whatever closure I needed had come not from any words we might exchange, but from reclaiming my own creative vision and bringing it to life without compromise. Catherine Winters, I learned through Publishing World Gossip, had accepted a prestigious position at Stanford University's literature department, about as far from Boston as one could get while remaining in academia. Whether she and David maintained their relationship after that night, I never asked, and didn't want to know. Their story was no longer part of mine. 10 months after the divorce, I reconnected with James Lawson, a literary agent I'd known professionally for years. We met for coffee to discuss a client's manuscript and ended up talking for 3 hours about everything but business, the changing landscape of publishing, our shared love of magical realism, the challenge of separating art from artist in problematic work. That coffee led to dinner the following week, which led to a literary festival we attended together, which eventually led to a relationship I hadn't been looking for but found myself embracing nonetheless. A relationship built on mutual respect and absolute transparency, where conversations about literature were just as passionate as they'd been with David, but without the competitive undercurrent I'd never fully acknowledged. I admired how you handled the divorce, James told me one evening as we walked along the harbor. With dignity and strength, but without bitterness. That's rare. I had my bitter moments, I admitted. Plenty of them. But I refused to let betrayal define me. That's what I mean, he said, taking my hand. You chose who you wanted to be in response to pain, rather than letting pain choose for you. As I approach the first anniversary of that night in the rain, I find myself reflecting on what I've learned, what I might share with someone walking a similar path. So here it is, my truth, offered not as universal wisdom, but as one woman's hard-won insight. First, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong in your relationship, it usually is, though perhaps not in the way you initially suspect. The unease I felt seeing David with Catherine at the literary awards wasn't just jealousy or insecurity. It was recognition of a fundamental shift that had already occurred beneath the surface of our marriage. Your intuition often perceives what your conscious mind isn't ready to acknowledge. Second, evidence matters, but not for the reasons you might think. I didn't hire a private investigator to catch David in the act so I could confront him with gotcha photographs. I sought concrete evidence because I needed to trust my own perception after months of gaslighting and minimization. The photos and text messages weren't weapons for a confrontation. They were confirmation that I wasn't imagining things, that my reality was valid. Third, how you leave matters as much as why you leave. I could have served David divorce papers at his office, or through a lawyer, or in any number of less dramatic ways. I chose to deliver them at Catherine's home on our anniversary because I needed to reclaim that date for myself, to transform it from a reminder of betrayal into a declaration of self-respect. Your exit strategy should honor who you want to be, not just express the pain you've experienced. Fourth, you don't need to destroy what was good to acknowledge what wasn't. My marriage to David contained genuine love, intellectual partnership, and shared passion for literature. His betrayal with Catherine didn't negate those truths. It simply revealed that the foundation wasn't as solid as I'd believed. I can honor what was authentic while still recognizing why it couldn't last. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, your story is still being written. The chapter that ended with divorce papers delivered in the rain is not the conclusion of my narrative. It was simply the transition to a different section, one where I am both author and protagonist. Whatever chapter you're in right now, know that your story continues beyond this painful plot point. The morning after I confronted David and Catherine, I woke up in my temporary furnished apartment feeling something unexpected, not satisfaction, or vindication, or even relief, but possibility. The vast, terrifying, exhilarating possibility that comes with having your carefully constructed life dismantled and being left to decide what to build in its place. That feeling of possibility has only expanded in the year since. Without the constraints of compromise or the burden of maintaining appearances, I've rediscovered parts of myself that had been edited out of the narrative David and I created together. I've traveled alone to literary festivals in Edinburgh and Melbourne, making connections and discovering voices I might have missed when traveling as half of a power couple. I've taken risks with acquisitions that the more cautious, partnership-minded Natalie might have avoided. I've redesigned my life according to my own aesthetic and practical preferences without negotiating every decision. This isn't to say that partnership itself was the problem. The right relationship expands rather than contracts our sense of possibility. It adds options rather than removing them. What I had with David looked like expansion from the outside, but gradually became constriction. a narrowing of choices to maintain the image we'd created together. The most unexpected outcome of this painful chapter has been a deepening of other relationships in my life. Without David as my default companion and confidant, I've invested more fully in friendships that had become secondary during my marriage. Eliza, my college friend who had warned me about David's behavior patterns and whom I had defensively pulled away from, is now back at the center of my life. A weekly dinner date and daily text exchange that provides both support and challenge. My other parents, whom I'd kept at a distance during the last years of my marriage to avoid their perceptive questions about David's absences, have become more integral to my life. My father flew to Boston to help me move into my new apartment, assembling furniture and installing light fixtures with the same careful precision he brings to his engineering projects. My mother sends handwritten letters containing passages from books she thinks I should acquire. Her English teacher's instinct for meaningful text still sharp at 70. These relationships, and others I've developed or deepened since the divorce, have created a network of support and connection. That's more diverse and resilient than the single, central relationship that once defined my life. I've learned that emotional security comes not from one perfect partnership, but from multiple authentic connections. If you're in the midst of betrayal and its aftermath right now, you might be thinking that my story sounds too neat, too resolved, too much like the carefully edited narrative I once constructed around my marriage. You might be wondering if I've simply replaced one fictitious version of my life with another, equally curated one. That's a fair question, and one I've asked myself. The difference, I think, is transparency. With myself first, and then with others. I no longer pretend that painful emotions don't exist or edit out uncomfortable truths to maintain a perfect storyline. I acknowledge the full range of my experience. The professional success alongside the personal disappointment, the exciting new relationship alongside the lingering grief, the gratitude for what I've built coexisting with anger about what was destroyed. This more honest narrative includes acknowledgement that some days are still hard. There are mornings when I wake up and momentarily reach for David's warm presence beside me, only to remember he hasn't occupied that space for a year. There are evenings when I miss the intellectual shorthand we developed over a decade together, the ability to reference a shared literary touchpoint with just a phrase or glance. The difference now is that I don't deny these moments or try to edit them out of my story. I allow them to exist alongside the joy, growth, and new connections that have emerged from the wreckage of betrayal. I've learned that a truly authentic life contains all these elements, the painful and the pleasurable, the loss and the gain, the endings and the beginnings. 2 months ago, I was invited to speak at a publishing conference in New York. The topic was Disruption and Innovation in Literary Publishing, and the panel included several leading editors and publishers, including David. We hadn't seen each other in person since the divorce, though we'd occasionally crossed paths professionally through email or industry news. I considered declining the invitation, but ultimately decided that avoiding professional opportunities because of personal history gave the past too much power over my present. I accepted, with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. The panel itself was unremarkable. Standard industry discussion about digital platforms, changing reader habits, and the perennial question of whether literary fiction can survive in an attention-fragmented culture. David and I interacted professionally, acknowledging each other's points when relevant, neither overly familiar nor artificially distant. Afterward, as we gathered our materials, David approached my side of the table. "Your literary journal is doing remarkable work," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "That story collection in your spring issue deserved the National Book Award nomination it received." "Thank you," I replied, equally measured. "Jackson Porter's new novel is extraordinary. Your editorial guidance clearly strengthened his voice without overshadowing it." We stood in awkward silence for a moment, two literary professionals exchanging pleasantries that couldn't possibly encompass our shared history. "Are you happy, Natalie?" he asked suddenly, his carefully maintained professional facade cracking, slightly. That's all I ever wanted for you, even when I handled everything so badly. I considered the question, not as an ex-wife speaking to her former husband, but as a woman assessing her own life with clear eyes. I'm building something authentic, I answered finally. Something true to who I am and what I value. Yes, I think that's happiness, though not the kind I once imagined. He nodded, accepting this non-answer answer. You deserve that. You always did. As we parted ways in the hotel lobby, David heading to another panel, me to a meeting with a potential author, I felt a sense of genuine closure that had eluded me even through the legal proceedings of our divorce. Not because of anything David said or did, but because I recognized that his opinion of my life and choices no longer carried the weight it once had. I had become the editor of my own story, making choices based on my values and vision rather than external validation. The approval or disapproval of others, even someone who had once been central to my identity, was interesting information, but not determining evidence of my worth or success. This, perhaps, is the most profound change that has emerged from the pain of betrayal. The recognition that while others can contribute to our stories, they cannot and should not define them. We are each the authors of our own narratives, responsible for the themes we emphasize, the characters we develop, and the meanings we derive from the plot twists we didn't choose but must nonetheless incorporate. So if you find yourself standing in the rain on what should have been a celebration, watching as carefully constructed illusions crumble around you, know this: the end of one story is simply the beginning of another. The blank page before you, terrifying as it might seem, is not a void but an invitation. An invitation to write a new narrative more authentic and aligned with your truest self than the one that came before. I won't pretend it's easy. There will be drafts that don't work, characters who disappoint, plot developments you never anticipated. But unlike the story you're leaving behind, the one partially written by someone else's deception, this one belongs entirely to you. Its triumphs and failures, its joys and sorrows, its unexpected twists and gradual revelations, all yours to shape according to your deepest values and most authentic voice. A year ago, I stood on Catherine Winter's doorstep with divorce papers in hand and rain soaking through my carefully chosen dress. I thought I was ending a story. I didn't realize I was actually beginning one. A story of reclamation, resilience, and renewed purpose that continues to unfold in ways I never could have scripted. Whatever chapter you're in right now, whatever pain or confusion or uncertainty you're facing, know that your story isn't over. The most meaningful passages may still be unwritten, waiting for you to find the courage to turn the page. I did, and you can too. As I finish writing this reflection in my Harbor View apartment, surrounded by books arranged in rainbow order rather than by subject, I notice the time. 7:42 p.m. Exactly 1 year since I watched through a rain-streaked windshield. As David walked into Catherine's brownstone with champagne and flowers meant for me. In narrative terms, this coincidence would be too neat, too symbolically perfect for literary fiction. A good editor might flag it as contrived, but life doesn't always follow the rules of good storytelling. Sometimes it offers these perfect circular moments that would seem heavy-handed on the page, but feel profoundly meaningful when experienced. Walk to the window, looking out at the harbor lights reflecting on the dark water. A year ago, those same lights witnessed my world collapsing. Tonight, they illuminate a different scene. A woman standing alone but not lonely, changed but not diminished, her story continuing beyond what once seemed like an ending. The page has turned. The next chapter awaits. And I am ready to write it, one authentic word at a time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them. Now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.